Good afternoon, everybody. So no, I'm not I'm not the angel on the cloud that has the giant bag of money that I'm ready to throw into your community, unfortunately. And I also totally get that I'm the speaker after lunch and that you haven't checked your email for 4 hours. So if you need to take a little nap at your table, it's actually fine. Or if you need to do this, I will completely understand, and I'll do my best to be mildly interesting as I talk about money, which I always find to be a very dry topic. And I think of myself as a social activist, but most frequently people want to hear about the money. So I'll try to cover some of the funder-related conundrums and issues and opportunities that are related to this work, because definitely it's an important part of the overall puzzle. But as I hope I'll try to make clear, it's probably not the single most important thing needed to make this work happen. And I'll start by, I guess, telling a little story about how my team at the Gates Foundation found its way towards supporting collective impact work. And my remarks are particularly about the team I work on. We're really the kind of home state giving team for the Gates Foundation. The foundation's a global enterprise. We're a small team that in some ways is a little like a community foundation in that we're the part of the foundation that's intensively focused on a place, and our work is responsive to the local community needs. And so, as I'll get into a little later, there's different ways funders, and especially private funders, tackle and make decisions about where they'll give money. And I just for a second wanted to differentiate the team I'm on from our national education efforts, for example, which aren't necessarily deploying these same methods. So with that, here's how we started to get involved. And my points are going to echo a lot what the earlier speakers have said. I'll try to kind of reinforce a few points they made, but really they did a beautiful job, I thought, bringing up some of the really key points and some of the key reasons why all sorts of community institutions, including funding institutions, should really think about getting involved in this kind of work. So in 1998 marked actually about the 15th year of the Gates Foundation's involvement in doing grant making in Washington State. And the focus of our Washington State programs have always been on improving the lives of low-income children and families. And we did a variety of giving across human services and education-oriented efforts. But what we did in 2008 is we sort of paused and looked back at the work we had been doing. And it was highly responsive in nature. People sent in letters of inquiry. It wasn't horribly structured programs where you had to meet certain goals. So we looked at all of this giving we had done for 15 years, and in our case it was $500 million over 15 years, focused on Washington State and low-income communities in Washington State. And we could see that we had made our grant decisions organization by organization in food banks and after-school programs, and adult workforce programs, and a large variety of organizations and efforts. And we thought, as we looked at each one, we thought, by and large, each of them individually were really great investments, really powerful investments that helped 30 kids here and 200 low-income adults there, and provided a couple hundred units of housing, transitional housing for formerly homeless families here. But when we looked across what had happened for low-income children and families, we couldn't tell that things had changed at a system level. And in fact, stats for our state said they really hadn't changed for children and families. Poverty was no better, educational outcomes were no better for children and families. And so we started on this journey ourselves. It maybe is a lot like the journey that your community has been going on here, in saying, wow, how come individual pockets of excellence aren't adding up to bigger changes for large groups of folks who we were seeking to help. And slowly, kind of through a process of thinking harder and making some choices about that, we would focus some of our responsive grant making more intentionally, especially in the Seattle area. It's part of Seattle's inside of King County, and look at South Seattle and South King County, which is a large suburban area just south of the city of Seattle, and to say we would focus again some of our broadly responsive grant-making dollars more specifically towards education outcomes. We started to ask ourselves, how should we do this? And this was before we had ever heard the words collective impact either, and before folks in the community had started on this kind of work. I won't go through the machinations, but probably a lot of the same things happened in Seattle that might have happened here in Aspen, which is that people who knew each other started to talk to each other about some of these same issues and found there was a kind of concurrence of beliefs. And so we, along with a lot of other community players, decided to start on a project called the Roadmap for Education Results, which we sometimes abbreviate to the Roadmap. And Becca saw me looking around for the clicker. Thank you. And so I've just, in an effort not to bore you, I'm actually going to skip all of these slides. I just said that out loud. I'm going to stick with the ones with the bigger graphics on them. And so what is the Roadmap project? It's a collective impact project, and when we say collective, we mean collective. This is 7 school districts, 5 community colleges, lots of early learning providers, hundreds of youth and family serving CBOs, mayors of 9 cities and county leaders, non-educational government institutions, and a big cadre of local private funders who've come together to say, how do we work better together? How do we help make sure that the world we had been in, which truly was program rich but system poor, how do we make sure that we're program rich and system rich? How do we start to build the connections between great programs, between systems, to help education, for example, K-12 systems, understand how their neighbor system might be hitting it out of the ballpark on 3rd grade reading, the district next door with the same demographics of students, the same per pupil spending, is 20 percentage points lower. How can you learn from each other? How do we build a knowledge sharing infrastructure in a community that helps people learn from each other, and with with examples from national folks like you've heard from today, but also from the depth of knowledge in the community itself. How do we learn what's working and help people to share that information and come together? I will also say, I won't go through the giant wheel over there, and I feel like I need an additional part of the graphic that's hundreds of little people holding up the giant wheel. There are many work groups, there are many existing kind of sub-initiatives under the whole Cradle to College and Career Continuum that we're bringing together to act in concert with each other. We're about 2.5 years into this project. We've come through the planning phases, and we're just starting the very hard work of implementing some of the ideas we've come across. And so when we say collective, we mean collective, and when we say impact, we mean impact. Part of what you heard on the prior panel, the importance of having goals and collecting information against them. I'll read the goal because I find the goal inspirational and actually one of the things that keeps me coming to work every day. The Roadmap Project goal is to double the number of students in South King County and South Seattle who are on track to graduate from college or earn a career credential by 2020. We're committed to nothing less than closing the unacceptable achievement gaps for low-income students and children of color and increasing achievement for all students from cradle to college and career. And thank you. It is a great goal, and it has really been a touchstone for the community. It keeps us on track. It keeps people thinking hard. It's the current, if you're just wondering what double is, currently if you grow up in Seattle, so Seattle might be a little bit like Aspen in a strange way, in that Seattle, I believe, is the second highest rate in the country of BA, adults with BAs. Over 55% have bachelor's degrees. I think only Boston is higher. We also are a community full of billionaires. There's huge wealth. It's a knowledge industry place. And yet if you grow up in Seattle, and particularly if you grow up in South Seattle and South King County, very low-income suburbs of Seattle, 24% of those kids will get any kind of college credential from a certificate to AA, to BA. And if you're a low-income student, or if you're African American, Native American, or Hispanic student, 12% will attain any kind of post-secondary credential. So there's an enormous gulf between the kind of enlightened, literate city Seattle believes itself to be and the actual experience of kids growing up there, all kids, but particularly low-income kids and kids of color. So as you think about, I guess the only actual specific words of advice I might give to you all is that as you think about setting some specific targets and goals and numbers for things you want to achieve, also think hard about including a goal around closing, if not eliminating, the achievement gap for low-income and kids of color on those numbers. I'll just say a few brief words on kind of the way funders think. It doesn't always make sense, but sometimes, and I'm exaggerating here for the purpose of making a point, you can kind of separate the funding world into two far ends or extremes. One is kind of funding where you're completely responsive to community need. You fund, let 1,000 flowers bloom, you fund what comes in over the transom. It's all good. And on the other end, you have the incredibly strategic, narrowly focused foundation, strategy. I call it strategy with a capital S. It's I'm being filmed, so I shouldn't mock my own world too much, but it can be a very narrowly focused view of the world that tells you not just what the goal is, but how you're going to get there. And what I'm suggesting is that I think that collective impact kind of occupies an actually really great zone between these two funding paradigms, and one in which you can get really the best of both worlds. So if you're a funder, or if you work with funders who you're working to kind of engage in the work of collective impact, because it is hard to see, I think, as a funder, how do we fit into this and what are the dollars going for? We heard about this a little earlier. What you get is, in a way, the best of both worlds, because you get a lot of community input. You get the ideas coming from the community to say, these are our goals, this is what we think is important, but there are specific numbers attached to that, and our goal is blah, 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 and we have this way of measuring if we get there. So you end up with kind of the best of both worlds. You have a focus and measures, and funders feel good, because like, oh, well, we're going to be able to tell if our dollars are moving towards a specific goal, and even if we didn't hit the numbers, at least we'll know whether we're on track or not, and we can learn from that. And this is something that that the funding world generally likes to hear about. You know, you can move from a lot of unconnected efforts to kind of a really big plan without it being a prescribed by funders plan. I mean, the genius of these projects, I think, when they're done well, is they're not funder-driven initiatives; they're community-driven initiatives. And in this case, you have a funder as a backbone organization. But you know, one of the things you all will need to think a lot about inside of the community foundation here is how it doesn't become your project as a funder. It's really the community's project, and it needs to be viewed by the community as their project. You get a lot of, I won't read through the rest of this, you sort of get my idea here. Last one, though, I'll mention, though, is it is an adaptive challenge, right? And this is one thing that can be challenging for funders as well. Well, what do you mean we might change in 2 years what we were focused on or how we were doing it? So there is a way you have to understand that these really difficult, challenging problems don't have immediate, obvious ways of solving them, or we would have all solved them long ago, right? Bad on us if the solutions were obvious for 20 years and we didn't do them. Well, you know what, the solutions weren't obvious, but we need a different way of tackling them. And to the list of really great kind of comments folks have made, I will say the thing that really struck me as a program officer in a foundation that had made a lot of investments and was kind of comfortable, kind of working in a certain way to move dollars out of the foundation, was that, you know, I keep forgetting who it was that said this, but I believe it was Albert Einstein's definition of insanity was you keep doing the same thing, but you expect a different outcome. Well, how can we expect a different outcome for our kids if we all keep doing the same things? And that has to apply to the world of the funders who are hopefully here to support some of these efforts moving forward. We also have to think about ways of behaving differently. And one thing I will say about these projects overall is, yeah, the goal is changes in student outcomes, but the hard work of this is adult behavior change, right? It's the adults inside of all of these efforts and systems and institutions that have to change. It's not the kids. The kids will change and learn and adapt if we as adults can find ways to change and alter our behaviors. And that is the really, really hard nut to crack on this. I think I'm already over time, so maybe these slides will be made available to you later, and you can see a few of these things. There has been a little bit talked about the nature of money, and especially raising giant gobs of new money to come in. I will say we're getting raised to the top for the 7 districts who are in the Roadmap Consortium was a huge win for our community. It somewhat undercuts my prior points I used to make about this, which is that it's not about new dollars. Really, these projects are about how do you best utilize the dollars that are in your community, whether they're private dollars that are flexible or frequently public funding streams that have more limited flexibility. We launched into our project in Seattle, South King County, just looking at the dollars we had, not with any idea, actually, that more dollars would come. The community did secure, through its 2 years of work of planning and thinking together, $40 million Race to the Top district grant. Thank you, Department of Education. But I will point out that $40 million over 4 years is $10 million per year. That's about $1 million per district if you divided it evenly in the roadmap districts. The combined annual budgets of those 7 districts is about $2 billion a year. So we are not talking about huge dollars to operate brand new programs, hiring tons of more adults to serve more kids with lots of more access. We are still talking about how do we use the dollars that are currently in the system, the public dollars and the private dollars, in much smarter ways that help us do the most effective things we can in tight coordination with each other. And with that, because I know we're running late and people no doubt have to start leaving soon, and I want to be sure and give a few minutes for us to have Q&A and also to hear from some local philanthropic leaders. You know, this, if you want to learn more about the work in Seattle, it's roadmapproject.org. I post a crazy amount on my Twitter page, just if you want to follow me there, that's that, or feel free to contact me if you have questions, particularly about the funder world, with the caveat that I don't fund in Colorado. Okay, and with that, sorry, no bag of money and no giant check. One of these days, I want to have the giant check to bring to someone, but it's not today either. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to your questions.